Cool. Well, if you want, you can sit closer. Yeah, yeah. That'll also because the way the shot is framed with the recording, it'll make the room look more full. Like
I got you.
a circle.
I got you.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, hey. Well, Lauren, at this point, fully like half of your entire day will have been set.
That's how it's fun, Julie. I was like, oh, I can go to lunch. Like
I got even room for one more too.
I know.
I had half of mine to like change out my research meeting. And I was like, no, let me not cancel this man.
You two could have had.
Yeah.
Julia's like, let me tell you what that's like. You made good decisions here.
It's a joy. Baked into it. All right, so whenever you want to get started, I will introduce you.
No.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. So very happy to have Eugene Korsunskiy here, Associate Professor of Engineering at Dartmouth College, teaching courses in human-centered design, design ethics. Prior to Dartmouth, he was at Stanford, taught in the D School, helped design the Designing Your Life curriculum, which I didn't know that about you until you put together this bio. So very cool. Other fun things he does: founding co-director of the Design Initiative at Dartmouth, executive director of the Future Design in Higher Education Network, which is where I met him, a global community of educators dedicated to creating, disseminating best practices in human-centered design pedagogy. He has won many awards, hey Charlie, for his work, including the Woodhouse Excellence in Teaching Award, the AppGuard Award for Innovation in Teaching, the Fast Company Innovation by Design Award, and has spoken at several TEDx events in the Aspen Ideas Festival. Very fancy. You
Go on.
There's also Europe too. Eugene.
Tell him handsome and.
Eugene is a joy to be around. Holds an MFA in design from Stanford, BA with honors in art and art history from Williams. From Williams College, and is just a wonderful person to be around. So take it away, Eugene. Very happy.
Just we're clapping your introduction. That's great. Yeah, we started. Thank you for having me, everybody. A treat to be here. We started doing a thing in my classes where on presentation days, every student team that's about to present gets a standing ovation before they present. Really hypes them up, gets them the kind of vibes of the success that a presentation will hopefully attain in the next 5 minutes or so, and just brings joy to everybody. So I got that idea from my friend Olivia, but y'all can just take it and use it liberally. She got it from her friend Jenny. Did we start recording yet? When I send this to my friends, I'm gonna like splice it to the point where like yeah. Anyway, so here's a thought that's equal parts scary, exciting, and humbling. And the thought is that the world of tomorrow is going to be built by the people in this room. Quite literally, I believe this very deeply, that it's the designers and engineers that are going to literally shape the reality in which all of us carry on our lives. And I think it's important that we don't let anyone tell us any differently. That it might be easy to think that it's the policymakers or the tech giants or the billionaires of the world that are making the decisions. It's the designers and engineers building the stuff, whether the stuff is physical, digital, tangible, intangible systems, whatever, that makes it so that whatever decisions wind up made at any levels actually cascade to the sort of the lives of real people. And so I think that designers, engineers are the most powerful people in the known universe. And there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that power. And so it's, I think, fun to be thinking about what we can do with that power and responsibility, but also having occasion to pause and reflect and think about how are we wielding that power is important. One of the things that heartens me is I was on your website, and the main message that, and this also appears as a slogan on every printed poster in every hallway that I've gotten a chance to walk up and down today. There's a real focus on here on making the world work better. And what I think is very much true, and what I've gotten from conversations with all of you today, is that what you all mean, and what I think we all mean together, is not just making the world work better, i.e. more efficiently or more effectively, but I think better for us means not just talking about technical competence, but we're talking about things like justice, and we're talking about things like fairness, and we're talking about good in the highest versions of what we can mean by good. And so with that in mind, my assumption, and I always tell my students, it's important to list your assumptions at the beginning of any experience, project, endeavor, etc. So my assumption heading into our chat today is that everyone in this room is already on board with the importance of considering ethics in design. We're already there. So I am not here to convince you that ethics is important. Like that's like we can all start with that being on the same page. And so I don't want to talk today about the why ethics is important. I just want to talk about how. Like, assuming we all know it's important, how do we actually do it? So here's a word that I thought I invented. Where I was like, oh, I'm gonna give you like a recap of my talk, but it's gonna be before the talk, so it's gonna be a pre-cap. And I was really proud because Keynote underlined in red the word pre-cap. I'm like, sweet, I invented a new word, and then I Googled it, and it's like totally a word. So pre-cap. So here's what follows. What follows in what I'm going to share is going to draw from the new design ethics course that I'm teaching at Dartmouth, and also, in addition to some course content, some under the hood thoughts about the creation and the rationale behind the course. And credit here must be given to Professor Kate Nolfi from the philosophy department at the University of Vermont, who developed this course with me. And so if anything that I say in the next 40 minutes or so sounds like smart philosophy stuff, I had nothing to do with that. Okay, with that, opening question for you all is, and this is a bad question because it's 3 questions in one, but y'all are advanced, you can deal with it, which is, what advice do you hear when you hear people speak about or write about ethics in design? Or in other words, what are some values or principles that you hear being promoted when you hear people talking about ethical design? Or in other words, what are some ethical do's and don'ts? Not a hypothetical question, please say some things. What are you supposed to do when you're doing design well or poorly?
Keeping in mind all the stakeholders.
Better keep in mind all the stakeholders. Yep. What else?
Don't extract from communities.
Don't extract from communities.
Do the most amount of good for the most amount of people.
Ooh, okay. That's okay. All right. That's quoting straight out of. I was gonna say John Stuart Mill was really pleased with what he just heard. Okay. What else? Look at the thought back there.
Well, I'm in the process, but
That process of a thought. Okay, that's fine.
I think value alignment.
Value alignment.
Value alignment with both at the natural resource level as well as at societal level.
Agree.
You might want to repeat what they said at the rock, which they can hear you.
Oh, I think Zoom friends, could you hear that? Do we have microphones spread evenly around in the room for that to have been picked up?
Getting a thumbs up.
Okay. Yeah. This is a well-endowed room on the front. Thank you though for checking. That's by the way, making sure that all stakeholders are.
Internal consistency.
So my short response to that is yes, I agree with all of that, and it's not enough to leave it at that level. So the big assertion that I'm going to do my best to defend, and if I don't defend it successfully, I'm just going to hope that the rest of you can join me in making the case for it together, is that when we're talking about ethics in design, we are too often talking at the wrong level of abstraction. I think we too often phrase ethical guidance in engineering and in design in the form of thou shalt commandments. Like, do this, don't do that, don't mislead your users, do seek diverse perspectives in your research, etc. And it's not that I disagree with any of that advice. I in fact think most of that advice is solid. The problem, I think, is that if we anchor the ethical threads of design and engineering education as a list of commandments for students to memorize, no matter how sound or noble those commandments might be, what we're risking, and why I think this approach is actually dangerous, not just shallow, what we're risking is perpetuating the just memorize this paradigm of Western education without leaving any room for actual critical thinking. I think at worst, this approach is dangerous because it risks anchoring the minds and the practice of generations of designers and engineers on the bias-laden values and standards and expectations of a particular group of authority figures in a particular moment in time, right? It happens to be the design educators right now. And maybe, yes, I believe right now that things like keeping in mind the perspectives of all users is important, is a sound principle to be steered by. But at the same time, I also believe that a crucial facet that gets left out of the conversation is not just the ability to identify the values that drive design work, but also to justify them. I think it's really important that we equip our students with the ability not just to name, oh yeah, you're supposed to, transparency and autonomy, and it's like, that's great. Why are those principles important? And I think instead of, and this is kind of still the assertion part of the claim here, instead of memorizing lists of requirements, I think what we have to do is work at the level of what you might call ethical source code, so that we can help students thoughtfully derive and responsibly apply new moral values and new design and engineering contexts into the future forever. Because no matter how sound we think a list of criteria or requirements or advice that we generate today might be, our students entering the world when they graduate next year or 2 or 5 years from now are going to see a world that we couldn't have predicted. So I think digging into the foundation and the bedrock principles from which we derive things like, it's important to consider multiple stakeholders, for example, is helping to equip our students with more evergreen ethical tools. And I think where we go in search of that source code is the academic study of philosophy. I think people have spent thousands and thousands of years debating, discussing, writing, thinking about what makes for a good life and what makes for good actions. And I think designers and engineers, though we often live in a different part of campus from the parts of campus where those questions are explored, I think it behooves us to bring those in. So some of those questions by which we can steer some of our curricula, but by which I think our students can analyze their own work and the work of others, are questions such as, and these are going to be bits and pieces of the design ethics curriculum, and you'll see resonant moments of this in a lot of what you've already been thinking about and working on. Is one, rather straightforwardly, what are the consequences of the things we create? Right, thinking like, whatever we do, it's going to have results. Let's look at the results. It's also not enough, we think, to only focus on results without focusing on the intentions as well. So another family of questions explored by philosophers for a good long time is, what are the duties that we're bound to uphold in creating those things that we're creating? And then so you can think about outputs, you can think about inputs, you can also zoom up for a moment and think about like, what kinds of designers or what kind of people do we want to be when creating the various things we're creating? Now, there happen to be specific academic words that describe the movements or theories that those questions are derived from. For the purposes of our conversation today, I don't actually think it's super important to be memorizing what the words consequentialism, deontology means, but I bring them to show you like, hey, see, look, it's derived from like real stuff and like actual scholarship. And there's a lot more to it. There's vast bodies of scholarship and literature on care ethics, feminist ethics, and the well from which we can drink to find guidance on how to live good lives and be good designers and engineers is much deeper than we can scratch the surface of in the short time we have together today. But these are three questions that I think are worth thinking about. How do we equip our students to work at the level of these questions, not the downstream principles derived from the questions? So I'll just for a moment spend just a couple of minutes on each. So and I think there are real benefits and drawbacks from each of them, which is like what makes my students kind of like be frustrated with everything I teach. They're like, so like we signed up for the design ethics class because we want the one clean answer to how I do this well, and what you're telling me is there isn't one. I'm like, yes, that's the point. Welcome to the investigation. So consequences, right? Pretty straightforward to think that one of the ways that we should judge whether or not a thing that we created is a good thing or a bad thing is looking at the consequences of its creation, right? Now, there's some real benefits to this. One is that there's a pretty straightforward conflict resolution that this kind of way of thinking allows us to do, but like in the conflict of is this or is this not an ethical device? We can just like look at, hey, did this do good in the world or did it not, right? It can be pretty simple. Another reason this way of thinking is appealing, it seems like, is its impartiality. It sounds like if we're looking at what are the outcomes, what's the good that we made in the world, harm to me versus harm to you, like I shouldn't get to count any individual person above or beneath any other person. There's something intuitively appealing to us about that. There's some real intuitive justifications for conventional wisdom that this approach also allows us to recall, like things like theft, abuse, they are bad on this account just because they make people really unhappy. Designing something that allows other people to steal things, right? Designing or designing in a way that perpetuates abuse, like, yes, that is bad, and it's bad because of the bad consequences. The other kind of nice thing baked into this way of thinking is that it tends actually to have a good, useful amount of moral flexibility. And this is where some students find the useful and also the limiting features of it, which is that it explains, like focusing on consequences can explain why some moral prohibitions against, for example, lying can sometimes be broken, right? Because we can say, look, lying maybe generally is bad, but like sometimes you tell a white lie, like so if the effect of the white lie that you told is like, oh, you made people a little bit happy, like maybe there's something okay there. The case study that I like to bring into my class when thinking about the consequences of what we designed is Juul, the vaping pen product. Because the critique of is this or is this not an ethical product very often boils down to thinking about the consequences, right? So you can think about there are two main impacts that this technology and this product brought into the world. On one hand, it got very many people, adult smokers who are addicted to combustible cigarettes. It weaned them off of combustible cigarettes and got them into this new nicotine consumption habit, which, while still addicting, is actually, it's been proven, it's less bad for you. Like vaping circumvents the ingestion of combustible smoke, thereby dropping cancer. Like that is just true. It is true that milligram for milligram of nicotine, having that nicotine via vaping is less cancer causing than the same amount of nicotine by combustible cigarettes. And Juul as a company like really did that. There are many smokers who said like, I could not quit until I found Juul and now I've quit smoking. And on the other hand, you've now addicted an entire generation of young people who were never smokers in the first place and never had a nicotine problem. Now you've addicted them to nicotine. And so, and the battle rages about like who's right. And it's tricky because this is an actual good and this is an actual harm, and doing the accounting to figure out, like how many points do you assign to one adult human weaned off of a cigarette versus one child human addicted to nicotine brings us to one of the main challenges of this approach, which is it's really hard to measure. If you're trying to figure out, am I doing the most good for the most people, there is, in fact, not yet any unit of measure by which we found that we can quantify all the possible outcomes and good and harm to other people. The other thing that's, I said impartiality is a strength of this kind of approach. There's a flip side of that, which is like actually impartiality sounds kind of wrong, because if really what you're saying is we have to weigh the effects on all people equally, really you're telling me that if I have a certain amount of money and I can use it to help my mother or a total stranger, there's something wrong with me if I choose my mother? Like that's weird, right? Focusing on consequences solely also seems to just be too demanding of an ethical framework, because it's also straightforwardly true that there are some results we can't foresee, despite best efforts. And the jewel inventors will be the first ones to tell you that addicting kids to nicotine was not a foreseen consequence of their action. So it seems like we need to be able to get ourselves off the hook for some things that are entirely outside of our control sometimes. And then there's the other kind of pernicious possible side effect of focusing only on consequences, which is it seems like it actually makes some room for injustice, because if morality depends entirely on results, then no action can be intrinsically wrong. Then it could, if you can follow this train of thought to thinking, well, if we can kill one innocent person so that many other innocent people can live, like that seems like it's greater overall, like that still seems deeply troubling to us, right? The idea of focusing simply on that kind of account. So we're kind of back to like, well, focusing on consequences seems like a good way to derive some ethical principles. It also has some limitations. There is a tool, and I'll share all these slides with you all, and these links are going to be clickable, so you can see the PDFs and everything that I want to show you all. There's a tool called the Tarot Cards of Tech, created by Artifact Group, and it is a deck of a dozen or so cards with prompting questions that has designers and engineers think with a systematic way, like what might be the unforeseen consequences of the things we're putting out into the world. So while there's still always going to be facets of the work that we're putting out in the world that we can't foresee, at least we seem to owe it to ourselves and the people using our inventions to, as much as possible, try to reason our way through thinking what some unintended consequences might be. And I think the prompting questions offered by this card deck are a useful tool. So check it out. So consequences, one kind of framework toward which we can look for deriving the specific downstream principles and values that guide our design work. There's the upstream side as well, which is, well, maybe we can focus on intentions. Like results, in some sense, are going to be outside of our control. What's entirely within our control are our intentions. So we can think about what are the duties that we have toward our users, toward each other. And if we just focus on following those duties, then maybe we are ethically in the clear, even if there might be some unforeseen circumstances causing harm down the line. We still maybe didn't do wrong. Maybe there was some unlucky circumstance, and that's different from I was an unethical designer, right? So the upsides of focusing on intentions or duties is it seems like we can get to some clean absolute rules that we can follow. Like murder is always wrong, right? Like that is easy to just follow that rule 100% of the time without getting into, well, if we kill the one person, like that seems messier, right? We can have the solid bedrock of just telling ourselves that like respecting other people, having integrity, focusing on fairness, justice, like those can just be the bedrocks on which, and we have duties to uphold these things. And if we just focus on those, we can release ourselves at least a little bit from some factors outside of our control, which might happen down the line after our products are out in the world. And the downsides, of course, of focusing only on duties or on intentions is it can lead to some counterintuitive conclusions. Because it might, through this kind of analysis, turn out that some actions are right, even when they lead to worse consequences. And there seems to be the lack of flexibility that only thinking about duties allows. And you might be like, well, yeah, of course, like consequences intuitively are important. So here's just a 1 minute delightful little thought experiment to get at like, well, yeah, no, sometimes kind of abstracting from consequences, we actually do have some commitments to upholding duties. This is where I forgot to ask you about the thing, but so imagine I'm walking down the street. And so what's like one place I can get muffin around here?
Mujo.
Mujo, right? Okay. So I'm walking down the street and I'm carrying this blueberry muffin and I ran into Julia, right? And what's another place I can get a muffin around here?
Eigen Cafe.
What's it again?
Eigen Cafe.
Eigen Cafe. Okay, great. Mujo, Eigen Cafe, right? Okay, great. So Julia's like, where'd you get that muffin? I got it from Mujo. But I know they only have one muffin left. And I'm like, I'm intending to go back to Mujo and like get that other muffin for myself later, so I don't want you to get a muffin. So I'm like, oh, Julia's like, where'd you get the muffin? I'm like, oh, from Eigen Cafe. I lied to her. And she's like, cool, great, thanks. I'm gonna go get myself that muffin from Eigen Cafe. She goes over there. They don't have the muffin. They don't have the muffin. They never had the muffin. I lied about the muffin. What they do have though is a delicious slice of lemon pound cake. And so Julia's like, actually, I like lemon pound cake more than I like muffins anyway. Let me get this lemon pound cake. And so she has this lemon pound cake, and it's actually more delicious than my muffin. My muffin was like a little on the dry side, which is odd about it. It's fine, right? But I'm like, ha. Anyway, so Julia sees me later, and it comes out through maybe like a mutual friend of ours saw me at Mujo buying the second muffin myself later. I'm like, Julia hears this through the grapevine. And then she confronts me. She's like, dude, like, what? You lied to me about where you got the muffin. And I feel like at that point, if I'm like, well, but look, you got a better outcome. You got the lemon, like the consequences were actually better for you because I lied. Even though that's true, the consequences for Julia were actually better. It still seems like she has a right to be pissed at me. Right, so like that's what it seems like our intuitions actually do point to the fact that abstracted from consequences, which may be good or bad, whether or not we follow certain duties to each other, like we do judge ourselves, we do judge each other by that, and that's where the picture gets even more complicated, I think. So one exercise I like to do in my class. And you all can do this by yourselves anytime you're working on a project, or you can steal this one for your class as well. So I have my students think about, okay, what are some, we're going to make a 3-column whiteboard thing. And let's think first about what are some duties that we think designers have toward their users. And this is where students start to recite all of that well-intentioned advice they hear from all the friends and professors and blogs about what you're supposed to uphold as a designer, right? So they'll say things like, well, designers have a duty to protect the privacy of our users, right? Like not disagree. I just want to be on the record. Where's the recording? I'm not disagreeing, necessarily. And so like, what's another one? Designers, you might think, have a duty to respect the autonomy of their users. Right. What are some others? What else? So we were talking about values of privacy, autonomy. What other values seem like obvious and true that designers should, and engineers should uphold or protect for our users?
Not sure if that's relevant, but the safety aspect.
Sure, safety. Safety is a great one, actually. Thank you for bringing up safety. I was thinking about putting it on the slide. I ran out of room. Also, like a really interesting thing about safety is you start getting into whose safety, because very, very often the safety of any one person or group tends to come as the loss of safety to somebody else. And so you get back into this consequentialist debate of like, who are we going to care about more? Which right, like if you stop at like, oh yeah, safety is important, and like that's where your analysis ends, like you didn't actually get anywhere meaningfully useful for your project, right? Safety, anything else? Probably others. And let's end on that one because that's a good example. Anyway, so I'm like, okay, well, like what are some specific manifestations or examples of designers living up to upholding this duty, right? So like one example of protecting privacy is setting up infrastructure to not sell personal information to third parties, right? Seems like, yeah, solid, reasonable, right? One manifestation of the autonomy one might be to avoid manipulative UI dark patterns, right? Dark patterns such as opt in to newsletter buttons that are checked by default, renewing subscription things that are hard to unclick, right? Like all these manipulative ways by which digital designers addict and entrap users, right? It seems like the reason that we have trouble condoning that kind of thing is because that seems to violate the autonomy of the users by manipulating them into certain kinds of actions, right? The really fun layer of analysis here is thinking about when it might be permissible or even necessary to break that principle. And this, I think, is the layer we really, really rarely get to when we are feeding our students, hey, remember what's important, privacy, autonomy, safety, et cetera, whatever, transparency, honesty. And it's like, great, all the time? So for example, I'm not necessarily endorsing any given example here, but you can imagine how saying something like, well, actually helping law enforcement track down a terrorist by sharing the personal device information of somebody who has like a terrorist track record with a law enforcement agency, thereby totally violating that one person's privacy, might not be an unethical thing to do, right? Autonomy, again, on its face, seems like, what can you say about like why you can't take people's free will away. Like, do a little bit of thinking. It might actually be the case that, for example, limiting infinite scrolling to combat cell phone addiction or social media addiction might actually be a way that we as designers have an obligation to limit people's autonomy, right? And there's a really important and legitimate debate there to play about when is paternalism pernicious, when is it important, when is it appropriate, et cetera. But do we as designers of technology, for example, owe it to ourselves and our users to build in limits on their own autonomy? Like, do we owe our users at any point enforcement mechanisms or opportunities by which we're not going to let them do the thing they want to do? Right? Like maybe the thing they want to do is just keep eating sugary candy, and maybe we owe it to their health to not let them. And I think it's at this level of analysis that we need to be having more conversations, and certainly that our students do. Okay, you got the downstream set of considerations about effects. You got the upstream set of considerations about intentions and duties. We can also zoom up and think about rather than, and this is actually a rather old line of thinking in ethics, like Aristotle was real big on this one. Rather than starting with what's the right thing to do, we can start with what kind of person should I be? And the thinking here is that any decision about what's the right thing to do in a moment has a real short half-life, right? Oh, and now I know what the right thing to do here is. The next time I'm in a new situation, I'm gonna have to like open up that analysis all over again. If I spend most of my time and effort reflecting on what kind of person to be, then that person will be more equipped to keep making right decisions all along. So what Aristotle and others say is that knowing how to do the right thing is a skill, that it takes observation, it takes reflection, it takes practice to get good at. You can't just reason your way to knowing what the right thing to do is. The thinking is that morality or being a thoroughly ethical designer, being a thoroughly ethical engineer it's a skill, it's a way of living. It's something that can be only learned through experience, practical wisdom. It's like a 10,000 hours thing, right? Like you can't learn how to play tennis by asking someone, tell me how to hit the ball in the right way, with the right angle, with the right amount of force each time, right? The only way to play tennis is to go and try to hit the ball and figure out intuitively through building those muscles slowly with practice over time, figure out how to hit the ball with the right force and the right thing, right? So the thinking here, and I want to be clear, I'm not endorsing any particular school of thought. I am endorsing the quest at the source code level of thinking. So the thinking here is that if you think that morality is the kind of thing where there's just a formula you can memorize and then you become good at it, then you're just radically misunderstanding the kind of thing that morality is. You need to go and practice and reflect and watch people who are really good at it and learn from their example rather than trying to reason your way there. So we can consider, and this is an exercise I also do in my class, I recommend you try something like this in your context and labs. You can consider asking yourselves a question like, who is someone you admire, who you consider to be a virtuous person? Just like forget design for a moment, like maybe your mother, maybe Mother Teresa, maybe Michelle Obama. Like think about like who do you, it might could be somebody you know, could be somebody you don't. And what are specific virtues that they embody most strongly? Is it that they're generous or empathetic or honest or gentle or altruistic, etc. Right? We have lots of different courageous. And then ask yourself, how might that person approach the project at hand? Right? Like rather than like trying to intellectually get my way there, be like, who is a person who is just like is naturally like maybe like has lived wisdom or like is just like through and through like a good person? How do I imagine their outlook on the situation? Another way to sneak up on a similar line of thought is thinking about what is a product or a project or an engineered artifact that you admire and why? What is it about the perhaps integrity it embodies? What is it about the lessons that it can teach us from just being the version of itself that it is that can teach us by example? The line of thought being simply again that morality might be sufficiently complex that engineering it from the ground up might be impossible. Like people have for thousands of years now tried to like find the bedrock. Like is the bedrock justice? Is the bedrock fairness? Is the bedrock honesty? Is the bedrock reason? It might be that we need to circumvent that kind of looking for first principles train of thought because it might be a wild goose chase in the first place. And a better bet might be to reverse engineer morality from what we might consider moral exemplars. There's people and artifacts that like we intuitively see and think and know are just like doing this right. Like I just admire Julia as a human. I just like I want to do work the way Julia would do work. And I don't need to worry about, oh, it's because she's like making this calculation about effects and that. I'm like, no, I just want to channel, how do I channel Julia? And so like maybe just by doing that, we get closer to becoming ethical designers. So even though it's I think real tricky and complex to get at satisfying answers to some of the questions that this line of thinking raises, I think that there are really nice, useful tools out there in addition to like, so I suggested the artifacts, tarot cards, the tech. There are other tools that I would love to just recommend to all of you for perusing, consulting, and I'll again share the slide deck so you can click on all of those. But a lot of really smart people in a lot of different contexts, some of them more tech focused, some of them more social focused, have put forth worksheets and guiding questions and toolkits, et cetera, that help people like us navigate the ethical dilemmas in our work. And so check them out, print them out, make posters of them. I notice y'all are really into posters around here. Posters are great. But what I bubbly. I seen Ted Lasso. Like the dude can't handle bubbly water. I'm like, I feel like that's how Ted Lasso. The moment at which, when I teach the design ethics class, that I end the class on, and when I say moment, I mean week and a half, is that you can spend a lot of your time figuring out what the right thing to do is. At the end of the day, though, knowing what the right thing to do is, I think at most only half the battle. I think the other half is figuring out how to act on that knowledge. And because most of us, not all of us, but most of us wind up working in organizations, right? Some of us are going to wind up starting our own startups and be our own bosses, and like that's cool too. Certainly, a lot of my undergraduate students who go through my curriculum wind up working in organizations, large or small, but certainly answering to some higher pay grade, established strategy, etc. I think figuring out how to act on the knowledge of I have a sense of like this thing that's about to happen is right or wrong. I think just comes down to the courage to speak up. It's just really hard to teach. It's really hard to teach. But I think the good news is I think courage is a virtue. Aristotle said that too. Courage is a virtue. And he also said, and I am inclined to be in his camp on this one as well, is virtue is a skill. Any virtue, as any skill, gets better and easier with practice. I think courage to speak up when something feels wrong is something we can do our best to encourage ourselves, to compel and convince our students to do. And the more practice they get doing it. And we have some skits that we do in class where they pretend to work in an organization that's about to do something bad and they have to like practice speaking up, and hopefully it's that practice that eventually in the real context gets them to speak up. I think that's important. I think we can get stuck on a really interesting intellectual conversation about, what would Kant say about like, and that's, it's lovely and fun sometimes, but even after we get there, we might not be there yet. Which leads to the other concluding thought of the course, which is that reason as a whole, just as a set of capacities and dispositions that we have, has its own set of limits. And in an academic setting, we sometimes forget, but it is true that we are not just creatures who think, that we're also creatures to feel, and there is a vast amount of research suggesting that our emotional and affective decision-making circuits are actually really powerful, rigorous information crunching machines, and that the parts of our brain that think in feelings are evolutionarily speaking older, more complex, more developed than the relatively recent parts of our brain that think in logic and words. And it is a disservice to all of us when we hyper fixate on intellectual, reasonable rationalizations at the expense of honoring any sort of intuitive or affective or emotional decision making that we as humans, remembering that we're humans, can bring to our work. And the easy way to boil this down, and this is something that my students, I think, intuitively feel pretty compelled to believe, is that a rule of thumb when navigating any ethical terrain in any design and engineering projects, something feels wrong, it's likely wrong. Right? Like forget kinds of the down like there's a real value to trusting how you feel. And most often when you talk to seasoned professionals and ask them to reflect on were there any ethical dilemmas they ever faced anywhere in the career, they'll tell you, oh yeah, there was this one, I just had this gut feeling. And then it's like whether or not you're able to effectively advocate for that position, that a lot of it comes down to interpersonal navigation and conflict and politics, like stuff that we also need, I think, to be teaching. Yes, in engineering departments. Now I'm on record. I'll stand by that one. Right, this whole like being people thing, kind of important. So there is a tool for that as well. So just like the importance of trusting your gut. So there's a tool called the Gut Check. It was created by Greater Good Studio, our friends George A., Sarah Cantor, based in Chicago. They created for themselves a rather robust, and again, if you click the link, you'll get the whole thing. A list of questions to ask themselves when starting any new project. And they assign point values, a little extra, but they assign point values to every question, and there's several different sections. And it's a way for them to pump their own intuition on whether or not they feel, and they go very much by feel, although obviously reason and logic are part of it, whether they feel a project or an undertaking they're about to jump into is going to give them any spidey sense, like wow feelings, and then they honor the spidey sense. So like at the end of the like, oh yeah, we just spent 10 weeks, learning about what Kant would say about things. And by the way, it's just like trust your gut. Students have a love-hate relationship with that lesson at the end of it. Anyway, here's the fun part. Here's the fun part. If any of this wasn't fun, yeah. Are we familiar with this graphic? Who knows what it is?
It's a, you keep zooming in, it's a Juliet, mom. Oh no, the
Fractal.
The zooming in, yeah. So it's a Coke. It's called the Coke
Could
curve.
have picked the Julia set though, which could have been.
Oh yeah.
Real missed opportunity there. All right, can we just do it? Can we go back to? I'd like to do the whole talk all over again. So I brought two and none of them are true. There's another fun one, the Sierpinski triangle, named after Wacław Sierpinski, Polish mathematician. He didn't actually invent it. It actually existed as a decorative pattern for centuries before 1915. But anywho, so what both of these, of course, have in common is they're fractals. Fractals, a beautiful marriage of nature and mathematics that so many of us find so appealing and compelling on an intuitive level. I love fractals. Fractals are a reminder to us that everything in the universe is connected. It just all depends on what level you choose to look at it. The way that planets orbit around a star, governed exactly by the same laws of physics that have electrons orbiting around a nucleus of an atom, right? The way that the veins in our bodies branch out, governed by the same exact forces that have trees branch out and rivers branch into tributaries, right? We're all part of the same cloth and connected at a deeply structural level. And the presence of fractals in this line, and at this point you might be like, where is this guy going? Came from Adrienne Maree Brown, an author of many books, including Emergent Strategy. In the book Emergent Strategy, she talks about the importance of understanding the fractal nature of reality and social systems in order to become the kind of person who can be positioned to make change in the world. She says, look, we try to make the world a better place. We try to build nations that don't war. We try to build social systems that are just. We don't actually have a lot of blueprints for how to do that because in our married relationships and in our nuclear families, and in our teams at work, what do we have? We have single charismatic leaders, personal biases getting away, we don't actually have at the small local scale blueprints for how to make happy societies. And she said, if we want to have any chance of making the world a better place, we have to start at the smallest possible unit, right? We need to fix our interpersonal relationships so that we have a felt sense for how to replicate that kind of success in those kinds of relations at larger scales. Until we figure it out, that there's no hope of building an organization or society. And another book that she also wrote called Pleasure Activism, and I'll connect these two in a moment, I promise. In that book, she talks about the idea, the fact that the expression of joy in systems meant to oppress is itself an act of liberation. Connecting her two ideas, the spark that animated a lot of what I've been thinking about it in my curriculum design is that if we are able to build what we are doing on joy, such obviously intuitively a good thing, right? An incontrovertible, uncontestable good, right? Joy, hard to find anyone's no. That if we're able to center joy in our work, that might actually be one of the most effective ways to become more ethical designers. Because I think that if we bring joy into what we do, then the energy with which we're surrounded, the interactions we have, wind up being blueprints for the larger work we do. It is really difficult, I think, to create thoughtless, inconsiderate products if you are engaging in a work in a joyful, delightful way, right? I think the change that we can make in the world, remembering again that the nature of all of our relationships is fractal, that the change we make in the world is always going to be a zoomed up mirror of the changes that we see around ourselves. And if we allow ourselves to focus on joy as a value around which to build our labs, our classrooms, our relationships, our projects, that joy can't help but reverberate up through the larger levels of our work. It seems like a very well, of course, like how, like why else, why else are we here? Small caveat is, and I promise this is the last time I'm going to bring it back to the ancient Greeks. I don't think all morality started in the West, and I don't think Aristotle is the only smart human. But the Greeks had this word, eudaimonia. And it's there's no direct English translation, but it's usually translated as happiness or well-being or human flourishing. And what it means is, if you describe what it means, it's the kind of joy, the kind of fulfillment that comes from a life well lived, that comes from living in accordance to your values, that comes from living from being a deeply ethical person committed to upholding moral standards in your own life. And eudaimonia is a very different flavor of joy, and this is where I want to make sure that when I make the font hot pink, that I'm not being misconstrued. I don't mean hedonism. I don't mean the joy that comes from only eating sugary candy. I don't mean pleasure seeking for the sake of pleasure seeking. Like, yes, that is like, I love trick or treating as much as the next guy, and like give me a pile of candy in the beginning of November, and I'm like I'm a happy dude. So there's nothing wrong with like a little bit of like just pleasure for the sake of pleasure. But what I mean by joy, when I talk about joy, and when I spend 5 minutes in my classroom like having a dance party for no reason, and like the engineering faculty walking by the classroom are like, what is happening? I'm like, like that the deep community connections that wind up happening from environments that foster those kinds of experiences. And there's plenty of biochemistry supporting like the dopamine, serotonin, like there are things that happen in our brains and bodies when we engaged in joyful activities. But I mean, all of that just helps to illustrate. And I think you all like reflect for a moment about like a project that you worked on that was really fun to work on. Like I guarantee you the outcome of that project was a more effective, more ethical outcome than some other project you can probably think of where it was miserable, you hated everybody, but like it seems true, right? I think we work better when we're having fun, which is where we started. So I think if we allow ourselves to appreciate and deeply commit to the idea that fun and joy are not antonyms of rigorous hard work, but in fact, allowing ourselves to intentionally spend energy on the creation, the fostering of joy, of fun in our environments, that we can't help but become designers, creators, engineers who make the world a better place. I think that link is impossible to break. Anywho, that's all the ramblings I had, and I wanted to open maybe a little bit of time for what thoughts do you all have about all of this? Musings, reflections on the connection of joy to ethics, on the on what Kant had to say about things, although I'm not as interested in him as a person. But yeah, anyway, what do you all think? I spent a lot of time on y'all.
Thank you so much for the talk. That was really informative and great. I like that.
Okay, we can just end on that.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm more like wondering when you brought up the exercise of thinking about someone or a product that you admire, and then trying to simulate how they would do in the task that you're doing. Do you feel, I sometimes also do the negation of that, where I think of someone that I really think are not virtuous at all. Mm-hmm. And then I think if what I'm doing is maybe something that he might do, then it points me in the direction that I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. I love that. That's great. Yeah, let's make t-shirts be like, what would Julia do? I love that. That's great.
Yeah, I was wondering actually to get your feedback on that. Like, is there something maybe that's more negative about this approach, which might make things less helpful?
I mean, yeah, so I think you want to be mindful not to only dwell in negativity all the time, because I think the cumulative effect of thinking about bad things can make you over time a more depressed, angry person, and we don't need more depressed, angry engineers out there. Like we need joyful engineers who are excited and enthusiastic and curious and compassionate. But like as an exercise every now and again, I think that's great. I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna have my students do the inverse of the because I think you're right. It's easy to like, there's a particular trillionaire I have in mind who made some stuff. I'm like, would he? Oh, if he would do this, I don't want to do that. Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Of course, no, thank you. Yeah, I want to, I guess, get a feeler for what you thought about that, and
Yeah,
maybe there's something else missing there. Yeah,
no, that's great.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. Really fantastic. Also a big Adrian Murray Brown fan. I used to give the intro to emergent strategy to my grad students, and I kind of
Love it.
got away from it. But now I'm like,
Yeah,
why did I start
yeah.
assigning that reading? It's really, it's really good. Two things that I was thinking about. So like, one, I'm curious if you talked about a dance party. I'm curious if you can talk more about like the kinds of community building you might do in a classroom, because like a lot of this, what you're asking students, like I think is best discussed in an environment where there's trust and where they've built some community with one another and where they can be vulnerable and like those kinds of things are also not also commonly found in engineering kinds of environments.
Right.
So I'm like wondering if there's anything specific you do. What are your strategies to like build community or a sense of vulnerability in the classroom? And then also like acknowledging too that young people, like they're forming their identities and their motivations at the same time you're asking them about their identities and their motivations. So how do you think about this as like part of identity formation? And I'm gonna throw a lot of questions out there. But the last one is, how do you, when politics comes up or partisanship comes up, because it does all the time, like in the work that we do, right? Where we're trying to not tell students what to think exactly, but like give them information in order to make them
Tell them
think.
how to think.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's like one step away from Democrat or Republican, right? And so how do you navigate that?
Yeah. So I think I'll go 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
Navigating politics, I get into like, look, there are some positions that are more commonly taken on the right. There are some positions more commonly taken on the left. I don't care who ascribes to what. What I care about is, can we figure out what like the truth of the matter here is, right? And what we think is or isn't ethical based on what values are we using and how are we deriving those values. And one benefit of leaning on, apolitical historical figures like Aristotle is like neither of the two dominant American political parties are claiming him or like so like that helps to be a little bit more in the like intellectually neutral space. I haven't yet had fights break out in my class, so maybe I've been lucky on that front. I'll keep you posted if
Okay.
I think the identity formation thing, yes, like the young people between the ages of, I have undergraduate students between the ages of 18 and 22, like very much are coming into figuring out what and who they are. So I think that just means that like this is a crucial time to be having these conversations, right? So I think the converse of, I think if we don't have this kind of curriculum, that's bad, right? That's maybe stronger than like, I think it should try to be nice. Like I think there's a, you can kind of get all the way to like, are we being negligent by not infusing this kind of thinking into this extremely volatile period of identity formation. On the creating the kinds of communities and atmospheres in the classroom that allow this kind of vulnerability and the collaborative exploration of ideas take place. One resource that I'm very happy to recommend to you that I'm sure Julia just pulled up on her laptop while I was talking. Right? Yeah. So I put together and collated from colleagues a little resource called Joy Cards, tiny ways to bring delight into teaching and learning, and they're little activities that sometimes take 2 or 3 minutes to do, sometimes a little longer. Collated from crowdsourced from colleagues of mine about little things you can do in the classroom to set up those kinds of environments, and I think like you do lots of little things like that, and you wind up having community formation as a result. Currently working on volume 2, so if anybody in the room has suggestions for joyful things that we can do in the classroom and beyond to make teaching and learning more fun, you let me know. We'll collate it into volume 2 of Joy Cards, but it's a I didn't add it as a list of tools on the toolbox. I should have. I'll add it into the deck when I send it to you. But yeah, it's a freely downloadable PDF for all of you to download and use.
And there's one physical copy on campus, which is in my office.
So come see Julia.
Yeah. Cool. And it is 5 o'clock, so why don't we end it there and thank Eugene. He did say standing ovation. You said at the beginning, but I'm gonna give it to you.
Oh, thank you. We can give one to each other.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing this with us. And you getting some applause on Zoom here as well.
Thank you, Zoom friends.
Cool.
Love you.
And I do know there's a meeting here, so we'll clear out of here. But if anyone wants to catch Eugene out in the hall,
Yeah. So at least one more hand with a question. So we'll take it. Take it. You want to take this outside? We'll take it outside. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Maybe some foot. Yeah.
No question.
It's a Bry Lab research group thing, so it was like
Oh.